whereas the Nagarjuna's, the chapters on Mula Madhyamika, is not that systematically arranged as a graduated path to attain enlightenment through middle way, even though each of the chapters are more philosophically better arranged. But so there's a little bit of different approach in that, and this edition of the book incorporates the translation of Chadrakirti's root text by the Padmakara translation group's translation. So we're going to rely on that. So that translation is also put separately at the beginning of the text, as well as interspersed in the commentary. So what I will do is not read through each of the commentary, but go through each of the verse and offer whatever relevant commentary that I could do. So a little bit about Chadrakirti. Not that I know a lot about Chadrakirti. Most of the Indian religious figures are very, very elusive figures, because Indians are not really good at keeping the records very good as Chinese were, because Indians believe in everything in cycles, so it doesn't really matter. It comes around, it goes around. So they always talk about cycles. And the Tibetans are not better either, because they also copy the Indian style. So they also use the 60-year cycle, so sexagenary cycle. So sometimes when they say someone is born in the first cycle or a third year, it's like 6 centuries, you know. So dating is really, really difficult in that kind of calendrical system. Also, there are very many similar names named after the same author, and people think it's Tantrics, Nagarjuna, and then the philosopher Nagarjuna, or the alchemist Nagarjuna, and people have all sorts of ways of even identifying or misidentifying with Nagarjuna, for that matter. So the dating of those early Indian teachers are very problematic. We wouldn't attempt. But it is said Chadrakirti became a great commentator on the writings of Nagarjuna, because there were other teachers like Bhavavika and others who have commented on the same text, rather a little bit to the disliking of people like Chadrakirti. So Chadrakirti's root text also has auto commentary. Auto commentary means his own commentary. In the old texts, they used to write a root text, usually all metered in Sanskrit. And then the same author then writes a commentary on the root text. So that's considered very valuable. Auto commentaries. Without auto commentary, most people don't know what is the thought of the author. So there is a auto commentary by Chadrakirti himself. So most students study that root text and the auto commentary first, and then there are what we call indigenous Tibetan commentaries on each of the texts, like Madhyamika Avatara. But it is said that so Chadrakirti was very learned in the subject, but also he has realized the meaning of the subject. Some people call it that he actually says that all form is emptiness, but then he says the form is also not emptiness. You know, the emptiness is form. And then he proved that by milking cow from a drawing of a cow. when he keeps saying everything's emptiness, but then people thought, oh, that everything is emptiness, but then to prove that, so to save them from falling into nihilism, he said, no, the form is form itself is emptiness, but emptiness is form, you know. So emptiness itself is manifest as form. Look, this cow is not non-cow, it's a cow, but not truly existing cow. Saying that when people think it's a cow, yeah? They don't say it's not a cow, it's a cow. So he actually milked the cow from the drawing to prove that that there is many layered meaning of form and appearances. So anyway, Chadrakirti is considered to be not just a philosophical author or commentator, but a realized master. So it will become very clear from the way he presents the text. So we have the what do you call the title Madhyamika Avatara, and Tibetan we call Umala Jukpa. Uma means the middle way or middle. Umala means in the middle way, and Jukpa means how to enter the entry into the middle way. So I mean to be able to fathom the meaning of the middle way, meaning that the reason why we have to enter into the middle way is we are not in the middle. We are falling into one of the extremes, either in externalism or nihilism. Often nihilism and sometimes eternalism, you know. So these two extremes are not just people who are philosophically minded people, but when we think this is the only way, this is right, that is wrong, that's when we are falling into extremes. So middle way usually means it is much kinder way to save both us and our opponents' opposing views, not to prove them wrong entirely or us right entirely, that both are mutually inclusive, only relative. You are only wrong relative to my view, and they are only right relative to how wrong they think we are. But both are interdependently wrong or right, but neither are independently wrong. You know, very few people are able to think and accept that view because they often fall into one of the two extremes, and then they get upset or hurt or wronged by each other's their own view, their own inability to enter into the right view. They think it's wronged by others, but others don't wrong anybody. It's our own wrong view that makes us to perceive the other wrong. But if we practice middle way, it is very compassionate because it saves not only us from falling into the wrong view, and also we saves us from perceiving others being entirely wrong. Because others is just dependent on our point of view. When we are not willing to budge or change our views, that rigidity and fixity in our view is what we call rigidity, the clinging. When you adopt middle way, you let go your views. That's what Chadrakirti says. I have no views. Because you let go all your views. Holding on to view is clinging. So clinging is not the right view. So the middle way shouldn't be really pushed into a dry philosophical argument in the corridors of academia. It's not. Middle way is a very kind teaching how to practice a peace in a middle way. To give up your extreme views and therefore come out to meet someone in the middle. That's what making peace is. So I would like to propose to everybody that this teaching of middle way shouldn't be treated as a kind of a dry academic topic, as quite a lot of people think this subject is. It is not. It is really compassionate. When you practice middle way, you have the right view and you have compassion. Your compassion is with the right view. If your compassion is without the right view, then your compassion gets consumed by righteousness. So that's why right view, middle way gives the right view, but right view drops you to fall yourself into eternalistic or nihilistic view. So that's why middle way is the topic. Firstly, at the very beginning, there is a salutation in the text. The salutation in the text is it says, homage to Manjushri Kumara, tender, glorious, and ever joyful. Homage is usually paid by Buddhist scholars at the beginning of their text in order to remove any sign of arrogance in as a scholar and author. If the scholar and author thinks it's their writing, their original writing, that kind of thing, they should have respect to the teacher and teachers of teachers from whom they have learned. So paying homage to Manjushri, here homage is paid to Manjushri Kumara. Kumara means youthful, and youthful has a tender and glorious translation of Jam Pao. Jam means tender. Tender has a meaning of very soft, devoid of abrasive afflictions. And glorious means one who has no fault beneath that, who is really glorious, and therefore whose knowledge or wisdom keeps him always youthful. Its lack of knowledge ages us more than biological age does. So Manjushri, ever youthful, when you understand wisdom discerning emptiness, your mind and body are ever so youthful. You're not ageable by things, because you do not see them extremely falling in this or that view. When we attach to something, it can age us quickly, but when you have the wisdom to see the right view, you stay ever youthful. Yeah. So Kumara is a Sanskrit word, is ever youthful, that doesn't age, because this is not youth. This is not talking biological youth. We're talking about intellectually, emotionally. You feel very fresh and unaged. So here one pays to Manjushri, pays homage to Manjushri. Sometimes you pay homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas according to the three Tripitaka, belonging to which texts, but we wouldn't go into that. But main purpose of paying homage is like Chadrakirti is paying homage in order that his writing becomes beneficial and cause a benefit to others, so that the author's pride and arrogance do not get in the way of benefiting the purpose of writing the text. So he's seeking the blessings of Manjushri as his supreme deity, and also then the writing becomes successful, because you can start a writing but people leave it incomplete. And so by writing something with that salutation beginning, also blesses the author to be able to start and finish, and not only start and finish, but also has benefit to people. Now, he wrote this as early as his date, like 4th century. That's like 17th century ago. How many authors' writing gets read and translated 1700 years? I don't think all those books that are sold so many thousands of people buy would never be published in 200 years' time. They may be sold of the first, maybe the most favorite, and the first maybe decades. After that, they're just collecting dust and nobody reads, because there's nothing in them. They're just made for entertainment. But books like this, written with such thought and intention, with a great bodhicitta motivation and no doubt, and prayer from the salutation he pays, is also blessing us in many ways, because our good fortune to study this text also comes from his prayer that he offered. So therefore, that is the purpose of the benefit, so that the benefit of writing this text accrued by many people, whoever gets to read this text. So now to begin the main text, firstly, the authors usually opens the writing by paying particular salutations or homage to particular things, not just like the Manjushri there, but it as main part of the text. So here, this first verse, the Shravakas and those halfway to Buddhahood are born from the mighty sage. And Buddhas take their birth from the Bodhisattva heroes. The compassion, non-duality, and wish for Buddhahood for others' sake are the causes of the children of the conquerors. So here, Chadrakirti says three things. He says there are three Buddhas. The three Buddhas are Shravaka Buddhas, Bodhisattva Buddhas, and perfect Buddhas. So Shravaka Buddha is what he called the halfway. Shravakas are the lowest Buddhas, the lesser Buddhas, and halfway Buddhas, to the Buddhahood is bodhisattvas. And the Buddhahood itself, which is the perfect Buddhahood, all of these three enlightened ones all came from the mighty sage, means came from the Buddhahood, came from the Buddha. So he's talking about the looking at the what is cause of Buddhahood. So even the Shravaka Buddhahood, Bodhisattva Buddhahood, and perfectly enlightened Buddhahood all came from the enlightened one. And the Buddhas take their birth from the Bodhisattvas. Even the Buddhas themselves came from Bodhisattvas. So then he's talking about Buddhas came from Bodhisattvas. Like Shakyamuni Buddha, who did not become Buddha, he was a Bodhisattva for 500 or more lives before that. Yeah. So Shakyamuni Buddha even came as a Buddha, perfect enlightened one in his life. Prior to that, he was Bodhisattva for many, many lifetimes. So that's what he's talking. So Buddhas came from Bodhisattvas, and compassion, non-duality, wish for Buddhahood, which is bodhicitta, are the causes of the children of conquerors. The Buddhahood came from Bodhisattvas, and Bodhisattvahood came from compassion, non-duality, and bodhicitta. So that means he's pointing out that in order to enter into the Madhyamika doctrine, one has to create these three. One has to create compassion, one has to generate compassion, and the bodhicitta, and non-duality. That the non-duality meaning that compassion that you practice for the benefit of others, even though it may look at the beginning compassion is aiding others, as we are the one who's helping them to liberate from suffering as we practice compassion. Actually, we are just as equally benefited by them being the object of our compassion, than we being the compassionate one who's a rescuer up there. But us practicing compassion only makes us to realize bodhicitta and the non-duality of it. So therefore, without compassion, you cannot realize bodhicitta, let alone non-duality. And compassion comes from sentient beings. Compassion is generated by focusing on the sentient beings who suffer, So if the cause of the Buddhahood is bodhisattva, cause of the bodhisattva is compassion, non-duality, and bodhicitta, what is cause of these three? What is cause of compassion? Cause of compassion is suffering sentient beings. Without suffering sentient beings, you do not generate compassion. You don't generate compassion by looking at the Buddha. You generate compassion by looking at sentient beings. So the cause of our Buddhahood is therefore generating bodhicitta and non-duality and compassion. But that is to generate it to compassion is generated to sentient beings. But compassion that you generate to sentient beings, although at the very beginning looks like if you're generating compassion to direct to sentient beings, hunger and thirst, and then you give food and clothes, alleviate the suffering, that may look like we are relieving their suffering, but that's only relieving from the sentient being directed sufferings. But that's not relieving them from samsara, So to be able to relieve sentient beings from samsara, you have to develop a compassion of what we call non-objectified compassion, which means the very, very object and subject and compassion we practice are inseparable. The compassionate person, compassionate object are both mutually inclusive. You can't practice compassion at the exclusion of objects. So it is the object that is actually the benefactor of your compassion. Suffering of sentient beings is the benefactor of your compassion. So your compassion arises by us giving rise to compassion, not because sentient being suffers. It's not the lack of sentient beings suffering is few. It's the lack of those who give empathy to the suffering of sentient beings are inadequate. But when we give rise to compassion, it is giving rise to compassion based on the suffering of sentient beings that gives birth to bodhisattva. Yeah? So they're talking about the causal chain of Buddhahood. They say there's a small Buddha, middle Buddha, and a big Buddha as Arhat, Arhat and Bodhisattva and fully enlightened one. So in these texts, in the Mahayana, generally they call three Buddhas. 3 levels of Buddhas, Sarvaka Buddha, Bodhisattva Buddha, and also perfect Buddha. And each of these 3 Buddhas are generated from being a Bodhisattva. So by taking up the role of Bodhisattva, that empowers you to then develop compassion to sentient beings. And if you develop compassion to sentient beings, it is through this benefit of generating compassion to sentient beings that your actual compassion is boosted. And then you develop compassion is just merely relieving them from some small sufferings. But real cause of their enlightenment is bodhicitta. So through compassion, then you give rise to enlightenment thought, because enlightenment thought is the one which makes others to be established on the enlightenment. So you have to attain Buddhahood. To attain Buddhahood, you have to develop bodhicitta. To develop bodhicitta, you have to have compassion. To develop compassion, you have to have develop that with sentient beings. So all the different levels of the 3 Buddhas all came from this compassion, non-duality, and bodhicitta. So that's the first meaning of the first verse. The reason for this is what is Chadrakirti doing is he's indirectly paying homage to compassion, which is the cause of the bodhisattvahood and Buddhahood. So if you're paying homage to the cause, you're of course paying homage to the result, yeah? So even when we go to pay homage to Buddha statues, we don't pay homage to the material because it is so beautiful, or color that is so very, very shiny, or the workmanship that is also your culture, like a Tibetan might like the Tibetan design or like that. We are not paying homage because of the artistry. We might like an artistic value of it, but overall reason we pay is because what the Buddha image represents, isn't it? So it's the compassionate one. The lotus and all these things just symbolize his mind is unsoiled by the samsara in which the lotus flower grows. So therefore, Buddha's infinite compassion and wisdom we pay homage to. So that's why here, Chadrakirti indirectly is paying homage to the Buddhas and all the 3 Buddhas and Arhat Bodhisattvas. But he's actually bringing attention of the readers to the cause of Buddhahood, which is compassion and bodhicitta, and of course the non-duality. And then he goes to explain in the second verse of Buddhahood's abundant crop, because he likens that as cultivation of Buddhahood as a crops. Of Buddhahood abundant crop, compassion is the seed. So he likens the compassion is the seed of the crop. It is likewise moisture bringing increase and is said to ripen the state of lasting happiness. Therefore, to begin with, I celebrate compassion. So he is paying homage, he's celebrating compassion, the compassion of the Buddha. Because compassion, Buddha, that now we honor as a ripened crops, was actually once upon a time a seed of compassion. That seed of compassion was not left dry. Yeah? Because the compassion without feeling to the sentient beings, like the seed without coming into condition of the earth, soil and the water doesn't grow, let alone become a crop. Likewise, a compassion which is not cultivated does not give rise. So the seed that gives rise in connection with the moisture, it's like the moisture. Moisture is the loving kindness. When you have loving kindness towards sentient beings, then you feel their sufferings as if that was your suffering. So you have the ability to have empathy of the suffering of others as if you were in their shoes, So when we stop being ourselves and start to think of the other in our mind, then we develop the moisture. It's just that he likens that as moisture. It's like a moisture bringing that therefore the seed does not stay dry in the jar, but when it is met with the soil, and then the water and the soil and the air and everything therefore give moisture, the moisture therefore breaks down the seed, Seed becomes almost like seedless. Seed has to become unseed. When seed has given up its status, selflessness. So that's what it's. Compassion is a selfless. By the moisture of empathy and loving kindness towards others, it is the seed of compassion is now conditioned. Like the seed in the jar is now conditioned to grow when it's met with the condition of soil and fertile soil, water and air, and like that. And then the seed now grows. It is to ripen. So the seed we don't produce the seed to become one seed. We seed to produce many crops. So therefore, in order that seed doesn't stay one finite thing, it will multiply maybe 50 or 100-fold more. So it ripens a state of lasting happiness. So therefore, the compassion of the Buddha is worthy of honoring and celebrate. When he celebrate means celebrate is very modern translation. In the old text we say we salute compassion. So we salute compassion because they're paying homage to compassion. They say if you pay homage to the seed, you're paying homage to the result. So therefore. This probably should help us. Next time we see a Buddha, we should see, Buddha is an embodiment of compassion. Usually when the explanation says why we pay homage to Buddha, because Buddha has 3 qualities. We say these 3 qualities are omniscience, compassion, and power. Omniscient is because he knows everything as they are, as well as they appear relative level, as ultimately they are. So Buddha is omniscient, and he's not only omniscient, but he's also compassionate. He's compassionate and omniscient, has taught sentient beings how to recognize cause for happiness, how to recognize cause of suffering as cause of happiness, cause of suffering. Sentient beings can't even distinguish that. So his knowledge of knowing cause of suffering is greed, hatred, ignorance. And cause of happiness is no greed, no hatred, no ignorance. So when Buddha shows this clearly, one who shows this clearly is compassionate one. Instead of saying some kind of extreme way of making people follow blindly, Buddha says, check yourself. What is the cause of suffering and what is the cause of happiness? This is as far as I know, but don't accept just because I say so. You got to check, and he gives complete power and authority to us to decide, arrive at a conclusion. He doesn't sort of threaten, if you accept it, you will go to heaven. If you don't, you will go to hell. There's no such things. Compassionate one doesn't say that. He says, it's you to decide, to find out. But I simply show you the way. So Buddha is compassionate to show the demerits of poison and the merits of medicine. So therefore Buddha is compassionate, teaching us the way. And not make us blindly follow under duress. So teaching us something, but leaving us to examine ourselves to find out the benefit of knowing the difference. So therefore, Buddha's compassion, Buddha is compassionate, and because of the Buddha's the omniscience and compassion, and third is power. The one who believes in the Buddha's compassion and wisdom will give power for them to know how to decide how not to suffer and how to be free from suffering, because it empowers them. It almost gives them the power to not to be in an uninformed way as in the past, but become very fully informed, have a totally power to control one's mind and thoughts, knowing what that matters to be controlled, no longer saying and thinking as outside things are causing me trouble. It's not like that anymore. One no longer stays in that poor victim mentality when you have refuge. So therefore, those who have refuge have power not to suffer anymore at the hands of their own ignorance. And when they have ability to lift the curse themselves, then the power of Buddha is not some Buddha gives power to you a little bit here and there, and we have to wait until he comes around. Not that. His teaching, the knowledge which we study, makes us to realize. It's a cognitive reconstitution. That is realization. It's not a brainwashing. We have a cognitive reconstitution of mind, and therefore realize what is cognitively obscured as cognitive obscurations, what is afflictively obscured as karmically obscured, and identify them as my past, not lump that with oneself or lump him with that, and see them as impermanent and temporary, and let that be a closed chapter, and have the power to not to walk that way or think that way. Because of that, then you are power. You have refuge. You have refuge means you are safe. You're safe from yourself thinking, pointing finger at outside or your past. That's the safety. You're not saved by Buddha by not having to face your karma of the past. Not like that. Buddha cannot prevent anybody from suffering their consequences. Buddha wouldn't discriminate who should or shouldn't suffer. That's not Buddha. Those who lend the ear to the Buddha and heed to it, of course, they will find refuge and solace quickly. And that's the power we're talking about. That's why we take refuge. We take refuge in the Triple Gem. Refuge meaning we reconstitute our mind to the positive. And when we do that by relying on the Buddha and his Dharma and the Sangha, we call them relative refuge. But ultimate refuge is ourselves have to realize that mere mumbling of the refuge formula would not suffice. So that's why we have to realize, develop compassion to ourselves. We have to first make the seed of compassion not stay in the jar, but create condition to moisturize, to develop empathy to ourselves or to others, and not have the ill will or wrong views towards each other, but start to develop the moisture of empathy and compassion, and change one's crooked wrong views, and then slowly bring some moisture of understanding. And this will then break the seed, become soft, and just become like a bean sprout. Before it was a bean, then it become bean sprout. It is broken up and it has changed, and so we become soft. And when we are softened, it's this the attitudinal shift is dharma. It's called tameness. You're tamed from within. You don't have any abrasiveness in your thought or mind or language. That's what we were saying about the tender, glorious, ever youthful Manjushri, unaged by these rough thoughts, and made young and strong, brighter by this wisdom. So hence, Chadrakirti rejoices all the Buddhas, and he sees all the crops of Buddha. Where did they come from? Shakyamuni Buddha, so revered, millions of his images, his statues, how he's honored and around the world is enormous. How did he reach that height of veneration? Not only then, in the same same century when he got enlightened, but even after 2,600 years, it's even more revered. Where did this crop, where this pinnacle, ever-shining pinnacle Buddhahood was sparkled, It's when they realize compassion. Compassion. So when you have that understanding, we celebrate the compassionate qualities of the Buddha. And we too have that compassion. And we only can moisturize the compassion by working with sentient beings and shifting our attitude, changing our views, and then develop the moisture and warmth. And it says then it ripens the friendship. Then it becomes what looks like a strange or stranger or adverse-looking person, but by our being able to drop the wrong views, bad thoughts, then it shifts. Then it develops the warmth between us and them, and then we can develop our enmity get dropped, and we develop this warmth. This warmth then develops the dry seed to break down and grow into a crop. This second verse is often quoted, debated in the monasteries, that whether we should venerate our Buddha image or whether we should venerate a compassion. And then when people say venerate compassion, but why venerate compassion? Why not venerate sentient beings? Because you can't give rise to compassion without sentient beings. And so therefore they say, why you have to seek Buddha out there when you have sentient beings who deserve for you to practice compassion too. And so the challenge therefore is how to not keep our seed in the jar, but bring that. So that's how you enter, how you take the steps. So this is very much a training of the bodhisattva on the first bhumi. First level of bhumi is try to, but a person who has not entered the path, we call Kansa Lama Choedak. Kansa Lama Choedak means a person who has not made bother to enter into the path. It means who hasn't taken up the compassion as a main yoga. Compassion as a compassion yoga. We can call it compassion yoga. Mahayana is a compassion yoga. Even Theravada teachers emphasize the very beginning and renunciation, all of that. Ultimately, they also pointing towards how to develop loving kindness and compassion. They all do that same way, different ways, but for the same purpose. And indirectly, we will notice that. Even if you meditate, even you observe all strict discipline by the books of Vinaya, so what? They say, if you do not turn compassionate. Kamala Shila says that too. He says, why people practice so much asceticism, strict vows, but not have compassion? And so if they would just try to please some gods or religious figures by living by the books, that's one purpose. But main purpose of all the teaching is to make us to learn one and only Dharma. And that one and only Dharma is great compassion. An amazing thing about that great compassion has to come to meet by condition, by working with sentient beings, only the compassion gives rise to. Compassion grows only when you cultivate compassion and get rid of ill will and enmity. Even your all other disciplines observe, but if your compassion has no sign of warming up towards sentient beings, then that's not the cause of Buddhahood. That's just cause of asceticism for the sake of asceticism. That's the extreme. That's the Buddha himself thought was one of the extremes of self-mortification. There are plenty of those in the past, during Buddha's time, even today. There are a lot of people who are practicing self-mortification as religious service, but have no actual focus on compassion. And it took great effort to try to show the way, that the actual way is to develop compassion. Even people teach karma abiding or special insight, there's the main purpose is to guide people to develop compassion to develop compassion and bodhicitta. Only then one is taking the first step to enter the path. And path generally, and particularly the middle way. Because this is about entering into the middle way. Entering in the middle way is try to follow the way that leads to the crops of liberation. So to get the crops of liberation, you cannot just get a big land, but you got the right seed. You can have a very big field, but haven't got any seed. What's you gonna grow? So if you haven't got the right seed to grow, what's the point of having a big empty field? So getting this compassion being completely clearly recognized as the quintessence of the teaching. Shantideva says that, this is like the butter churned out of whole Dharma. Bodhicitta is the butter churning from the whole body of teachings. So here Chadrakirti highlights in this second verse that the point of achieving crops of Buddhahood is culminated by practicing this correct seed, that is compassion. Even crops of the Buddhahood, the Supreme Perfect Samyak Sambuddha or Bodhisattvahood or Arhathood, are all as a result of developing compassion. So this also makes us to open the Arhathood. We shouldn't view them with prejudice, saying Arhathood is some selfish people who get the enlightenment for themselves. That was some kind of philosophical view, saying that Arhat being someone there is a very, very unfair comment. Arhats are like bodhisattvas who deliberately attain Arhathood because they are small Buddhahoods. Arhathood are not are examples we should rejoice to practice. So sometimes bodhisattvas themselves go as manifest at Arhathood. Only because some people's aptitude would not know how to copy anything but that suit their best mentality for some time, and then later on they are allowed to have an upgrade. Did you notice in aircraft sometimes the hostess comes, do you need an upgrade? But they can't give you that unless you're in the aircraft. Sometimes it's a long journey. You wouldn't mind, You wouldn't mind getting an upgrade. You don't care how much it costs because you're so crammed in the little seat and you still got 12 hours to fly. Yeah, it's good upgrade. Yeah, I'd have to get our upgrade. Some people think this is non-upgradable, but I don't. I think you can buy the flexible ticket. If you buy the flexible ticket, you can upgrade. Yeah, beings are like the moon in the rippling water, fitful, fleeting, empty in their nature. So this is talking about a bodhisattva who now goes to practice compassion with sentient beings. Sorry, I'm jumping. Beginning of third verse is, beings think I at first. Now this is talking about the problem of not being able to enter into the path. We were talking about people who do not enter the path. Because it's very good to praise compassion on one hand, but on the other hand, what makes people fail to develop compassion, why people do not realize the importance of compassion, is because beings, meaning sentient beings, think I at first, I, me, mine, these three things. And cling to self. They first have this idea of I, and they don't even question of its validity. They totally believe of its innate, permanent, truly existent I, and cling to the notion of self. And then they think of mind. When you think of I, then mine, my house, my hand, my this, my that, my feeling, my perception, and so on, and are attached to things. So this is talking about the hindrance of developing the crop, developing the seed of compassion. Because beings believe in the I and me and mine, and thus they turn helplessly as buckets on a water wheel, and to compassion for such being, I bow down. So the first three lines are very important. So first three lines are talking about how sentient beings are lost into the vicious cycle of a turning wheel. So this analogy about when you mean bucket pouring in the old mills, when the water pours from the top, one bucket falls on the wheel, then the wheel turns, yeah? And so one bucket of bad thoughts, me, mine, comes on, that continuously cause the wheel to turn ceaselessly, and therefore there's no lack of the bucket pouring over, because the wheel is so badly designed, and each time the water falls, it just turns ceaselessly. So we are habituated, basically, from not only this life, but life before and before and before, and have never been told how to question what is self. Is it really truly existing? Is it not just merely labeled? Or is it really identical to the body? If so, where is it in the body? From the top to the crown to the feet, and from the skin to the marrows, from the marrow to the bone. We never go and check and contest and try to refute if there's any falsity, or finding out there is no true I, let alone mine. Because when there is the initial wrong view is undetected, I, and then mind doesn't get detected, and then it's just like a wheel. It could keep turning, and that's usually the case. So when you see that, subjectively, of course, sometimes we can pause and feel a little bit pitiful in the time and energy lost in the I and me and my feelings, my perceptions, my rights, and this all about I and me and mine. When you begin to comprehend this, then you develop compassion to others who are lost in that vicious perpetuation. We call perpetuation. This because the bucket full of waters keep falling, and the wheel is just constantly turning, and there's no way of stopping the water bucket falling. If the water bucket doesn't fall, maybe the wheel will stop. But what is a bucket full of water? Because people always try to fill their bucket. In Buddhism, we try to empty our bucket. In the modern world, we always try to fill your bucket, which is a very bad analogy. So wish we have a bucket with a hole would be good. So this teaching is trying to hold the bucket, trying to create a lot of holes in the bucket, so that the bucket doesn't throw enough water to make the wheel turning. It's very good. The mindfulness might be able to sort of stop the bucket filling itself, So this is a very famous verse early in the text, that how beings are perpetuated. They do not know how to pause. So the mindfulness can pause the bucket from being filled with the water. If the bucket isn't filled, it wouldn't pour down. If it doesn't pour down, it wouldn't turn the wheel. So everything is interdependent like that. So how do we make sure the water doesn't fill the bucket? You see? Because of I and me and mine, it always does the filling of the bucket. But if there's a pause, ability to pause from the filling of the bucket, at least a pause. Of course, it wouldn't pour the water quickly as it was doing, but it will be stopped. So there will be sometimes when meditation and prayer are good, you can see the story and drama in your mind slows down, calm. And you no longer have the aversion or truly existing me or truly existing them or truly existing perception like that, then of course there wouldn't be this incessant bucket pouring water on the wheel. You know? So this analogy is an amazing one that Nagarjuna taught. So he's painting a very graphic picture of that bucket of full of me, the bucket of full of me, all about full of me. Helplessly, he says. Nobody is filling the bucket knowingly, consciously. They're filling the bucket helplessly, mistakenly, erroneously, without knowing they even have a bucket, without knowing they're filling it, without knowing the wheel that is turning and condition they are whipping themselves is caused by that. They see something else. They don't know the causation. So this is the plight. One who knows this, he says, and to compassion for such beings I bow down. So beings do not know that. You have to have only compassion. They don't know the damn thing. They don't know the mechanics of suffering. They don't know the psychology of suffering. They know the physics of suffering. They don't want suffering, even slightest one. But they don't know the mechanics of it, and so they don't know what is cause, what is effect. So one who shows compassion to the ignorance of sentient beings for unconsciousness, I pay homage. So Shantideva is tearfully meditating that how sentient beings are unable to enter the middle way. How could they enter the middle way? When you consciously enter middle way, you have to be woken up partially, intellectually at least. Otherwise, you are constantly in that vicious cycle of blaming and naming and pointing finger at others and each other, and then that's just neither of them doing anything because they're completely unaware what they're doing is wrong. And helplessly they're doing this. So all sentient beings have one mistake, that's ignorance. They don't know. So when you know sentient beings don't know what they're doing, then you have compassion for they don't know. Even in conventional law, there's whether the person did willfully, intentionally, or did accidentally. Even common law distinguishes between one who knows, does willingly, or does it knowingly or ignorantly. If someone did by not knowing, they may be pardonable. See? Chadrakirti likens every sentient being is helplessly don't know which way to turn to, how to stop the bucket being filled, which is causing the wheel to turn. That analogy, is so graphic. If one knows exactly the mechanics of the thing and don't make sure no water goes in the bucket, that would be a fantastic way to stop the wheel turning. So, what is that? Grasping to the body as me, mine, I as height, I as my weight, and I as my color or lack of their color, and then suffer thinking I'm short, these people suffer because of these wrong views of self. They're thinking that's the bucket that fills the bucket. This is the what wrong views makes themselves to suffer. They mistakenly think they should be tall, they should be slim. They don't realize how many miserable tall people are there, how many miserable slim people are there. They just assume they should be this and they'll be happy. You totally don't understand anything whatsoever. So you develop compassion. Helplessly they are making this bucket full of water pour again and again, causing the wheel to turn, and therefore the vicious cycle continuously go uninterrupted. And to compassion for which, for such beings, I bow down. So when you develop compassion to sentient beings, whether they are close to you or whether you love them or whether you have opposite feeling towards them, when you have this compassion towards them, then you don't have this aggressive feeling, they are wrong or they're wrong to me type of thing. That's two extremes, you know. Or think they have nothing to do with someone else made them to do. You don't think like that. So, but they're all helplessly causing the bucket to fill, and that then pour the water on the wheel, and then they get churned up and down by the machinery. And they don't know the mechanics of suffering, how it's churned again and again. It's just like an animal who got trapped in the trap, thinking they wanted to get out of the trap, but they just run into just that. When you look at when you see an animal get trapped in a trap, you feel so sorry, isn't it? So sentient beings are like that. Sentient beings are unknowingly try to get out of traps, which goes into the very trap. So, therefore, how we go about addressing that? Beings are like the moon in the rippling waters, fitful, fleeting, empty in their nature. So when we see these difficult sentient beings that we could not really help, and we may be overwhelmed by seeing such enormity of sentient beings, even those few we try to help or try to deal with our own anger or negativity with them, we think they are so unruly we couldn't help. We shouldn't think even the beings, if the problems of sentient beings themselves are empty, the problematic sentient beings has to be just as empty, you know. So beings are like a moon in the rippling water, you know. You'll see the moon in the water. But not because there is a moon in the water. There is no moon in the water. It's usually many causes. So the sentient beings that appears, whatever, from extremes to fitful, fleeting, and empty, their nature. So all the appearance of sentient beings in your mind or moon, like mind, in which is reflecting, are just conditioned by various fit-causing emotions in you or them. They are not really truly what they appears. Even if they appear one moment, they won't be there the same way. So don't think they are the same person or same fixed, finite sentient being that is that in one. Don't box each other as that or as that or as that habit or that behavior. Don't box anybody in one thing because they are very, very fleeting. They themselves do not know they did it or doing it. So there isn't any fixed entity as a sentient being. They're very illusory-like. Not only they're fleeting and changing, they're empty. They're like a illusion, empty in the nature. So when you're able to, because when Chadrakirti says that the suffering is caused by misapprehending I as real and mine and so on, of course the other and others, these others did this, of course is equally wrong. You know, if the object is subjectively mistaken as self, like if the body is mistaken subjectively as I, you know, and things as mine, you know, of course the sentient beings being this or that is also a mistaken perception, you know. So there's a, you know, where there's yellow water, red water, both mirages of yellow mirages, red mirages, both same mirages. The different color is different color, but actually they are equally mirages. So because of that, if the I-ness and my-ness are the mistaken entity of things, then the sentient beings as being this kind of sentient being, I like that kind of sentient, I don't like, this kind of fixed labels we give are only designated by us, but they actually are very, very fitful. Fitful means they're just like a fit. When there's a fit, they appears. When you don't have fit, they don't arise. So it's your fit. You know, when you have this kind of a mental fixation, then it appears. But when you don't have that, it doesn't appear. It's very fleeting, like clouds or weather pattern. You know, one moment you looked at the window, it was so misty, and within half an hour they all cleared up. So things are people. So all sentient beings are like, don't ever box somebody or frame somebody as being this or that. If you do that, that's when your compassion is not going to moisturize. You develop cold feeling, and so there will be no crops. So therefore, sentient beings, however they may appear, are fit object of your compassion. Otherwise, we have a danger of sentient beings as being real, just as I hold to aggregate as me and mine. We might do the same with sentient beings as well. So these examples of being fleeting and empty nature is a very important topic to think about. So next, beings are like the moon in the rippling water. Beings are like the moon in the rippling water. Because even for the moon to appear in the rippling water, they have to be cloudless. Only when there's no cloud, then that will appear. So those two things are not just the fit condition. There are other conditions that makes the moon manifest. But make the moon manifest in a clear water doesn't mean the moon is truly there. So what appears as sentient beings that makes us to grip them with the one extreme aversion or another, an extreme emotion or another, is as fleeting as those appearances, those apparitions are. When you are able to do that, then you will not apprehend them as I and me and mine or aggregate. When you're able to do that, then of course you'll be able to perceive them as what they truly are, without making. So these first 3.5 verses is more like a opening remark of the text before going into the first chapter. The first chapter is actually chapter on generosity. It's a chapter itself is on generosity, because they say if you practice perfect generosity, you achieve the first bhumi. That's why it's called supreme joy. Bodhisattvas see them thus and yearn to set them free. So a bodhisattva who has given rise to compassion sees sentient beings as fleeting and lacking the true nature, and therefore do not see them as fixed entities. Then the bodhisattvas do not get fatigued or troubled by sentient beings. Most of the bodhisattvas are in the meditative state of seeing them as illusion and mirages. But they themselves give compassion to those, like constantly turning the bucket full of water onto the wheel, under the turning machinery. They are doing that. Alas, what a pity they are doing this. So bodhisattvas, for the sake of other sentient beings, they have this compassion for who they see are helpless. For themselves are always in meditative state. The seeing them is illusory and fleeting nature. But they do not become sort of absent, unconnected with sentient beings, because they're still moisturizing with loving kindness. So they're not sort of cold, kind of very impersonal feeling. Bodhisattvas have to show the warmth and empathy, and they call joy or sympathetic joy, loving kindness compared. They have to practice that however remote it is. So bodhisattva is never remotely they're not too remote to be available. Bodhisattvas are always, like the sun is always shining. We think it's not shining here, but it's all wrong orientation. Sun is still shining somewhere. Sun is always shining, It's only when we are exposed to the right condition, then we feel the heat of the sun and temperature of the sun. But when we are disoriented, we don't receive the sun. So bodhisattvas are always in that meditative state of themselves abiding in nirvana, but not attached to nirvana, because they are still connected with sentient being, with the compassion. With the compassion. Bodhisattvas see them as thus. Bodhisattvas see them as thus always, There are no times bodhisattvas see them differently. That's why they do not see them literally as truly existing. They cannot harm bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas can stay in that state of mind without impeded by anything. Unless they are not yet fully developed bodhisattvas. Not fully developed bodhisattvas will lapse. As both practitioner on path of accumulation, as most of us, we will often lapse up and down. Sometimes we peak, and then sometimes we lapse, because we haven't quite reached the irreversible stage. But bodhisattvas themselves always see them in the fleeting, illusory nature of sentient beings, not as some fixed, truly existing things. But yet they see them as those who don't know that yet, therefore helplessly suffering as they do. So therefore bodhisattvas are compassionately engaged, but wisdom point of view, not tainted by any kind of attachment to sentient beings as real, and what they did as real. Neither of them are truly existing. Yearn to set them free. Yeah. Therefore, bodhisattva has every wish to set them free by their own continuation of bodhicitta, both relative and ultimate bodhicitta. Because they have reasonable ultimate bodhicitta, because that's why their relative bodhicitta is never impedable. Their relative bodhicitta cannot be lapsed. Yeah, they are yearn to set free. It's the beginner bodhisattvas whose yearning or wish comes and goes and peaks and then just enough goes flat. Bodhisattvas always, even in dream, even in sleep, they don't forget sentient beings. I don't think bodhisattvas ever sleeps, but if they sleep, they still don't. They sleep for the benefit of sentient beings. So bodhisattvas have no time. They are not doing for the sake of sentient beings. So we yearn to set them free. Their wisdom is beneath compassion's power. Yeah, this is very important. The compassion and wisdom of bodhisattvas are integrated. Wisdom is beneath. I mean, the wisdom of discerning lack of inherent existence. Things are beneath. They don't treat sentient beings as non-existing things for the sake of sentient beings. For the sake of sentient beings, they have to moisturize. They have to show the empathy and loving kindness and empathy to tailor whatever they best can do to sentient beings. But when they say wisdom is beneath, I mean, they still know that what they're doing is not truly existing, nor are true sentient beings truly existing. Because of that, they're not attached to what they're doing, but therefore their compassion's power is even more powerful, because their compassion is not fatigable, not exhaustible, because their compassion is the real compassion they give is not which relieves and sentient beings from suffering. Real thing that relieves sentient beings is through their own realization of it. So bodhisattvas don't say, I don't think I can help anybody. Looks like it was a hard afternoon. They don't say that. Bodhisattvas never believe they liberate any sentient being, because they don't truly exist. Ultimately, they don't truly exist. So how would they ultimately take into credit, say whether they did or didn't? I mean, they said, so ultimately, bodhisattva says wisdom is beneath the compassion's power. So their compassion is not reducible or disempowerable by lack of ability to help sentient beings. And ultimately, when we read the Heart Sutra, there is no gain, no gain, no wisdom, no such things, no truly existing things. Of course, there's interdependently originated things that you can practice. Through dedication with Samandabhada's prayer, they rest in perfect joy, the first of all grounds. So this is the gist of why it's talking about how the bodhisattvas who have entered into the path to lead sentient beings by practicing generosity. But their generosity, which they practice for benefit of other beings, is through dedication by incorporating Samandabhada's prayer. The Samandabhadra, as a bodhisattva, do bulk of work for the benefit of others, but always offer more prayers for what they could not yet succeed today. So they don't dismiss what they couldn't do as something to be left and ignored, saying it's empty or something. No, they still offer prayers where they're left unfinished with certain sentient beings. They can come and pick up the pieces next time, next life. So bodhisattvas don't try to unrealistically expect themselves or others to think this is the only last life to get it fixed and done, if not too late. No, bodhisattvas always say there is another life, and therefore bodhisattvas have, for many eons, however long many eons takes, they will still offer prayers where they're left unfinished. Samandabhada's prayer, they do so by paying homage, they do so by making offerings, they do so by confession. Bodhisattvas still confess in their daily practices. So conventionally, they do not think of themselves as above beginner. They still see the need for them to act like a bodhisattva, emulating the example of Samandabhadra. Samandabhadra's 63-verse prayer, very famous one, which they do during prayer festivals, is filled with all these amazing aspirations. So bodhisattvas are very down to earth. What they couldn't do, they don't give it up. They put it on the prayer list for the next time to continue, next life to continue. And they don't expect neither themselves or others to be someone who has to be perfectionist to get it right, everything now. If they are true disciples, they shouldn't fail top of the no. Bodhisattvas always never give up on any task or any sentient being just because things aren't going well. But they always put in a prayer list. So that next life, next opportunity, one will be able to revisit. And this is the most generous. The perfect joy comes from their heart that couldn't be disheartened. They always offer prayers. They're never saying, "Oh, I did everything, I'm so happy." But whatever I didn't succeed, I'll offer prayer to come back and revisit. And then, therefore, they haven't given up, have they? So they haven't lost bodhicitta, have they? No, because they are enlivening bodhicitta by this dedication of merits. And this is how they will slowly claim the first bhumi, the first ground. First ground, first bhumi. So we might stop here take a few comments or questions.
Hi there, can you hear me in there?
Yes.
Hi Rinpoche, I do have a question from Paul from YouTube.
Yeah.
He asks about rejoicing. What is its purpose? How does rejoicing benefit? Is it an indirect way to awaken compassion?
Yes. Yes, rejoicing is gratitude. Gratitude empowers us to recollect the good of someone, opposite of the resentment. Lots of people have resentment. The resentment can be remedied if they practice gratitude. Like the resentment towards parents. the reason they have resentment is because they fail to spend doing rejoicing and develop gratitude to parents all the good they have done. If they start create an inventory of all the good things they can rejoice, recollect of the parents or someone, or their life, when they develop gratitude, then gratitude can quickly sort of remedy all the things that one was unhappy about, as if it looks very mean and very unnecessary. So when the mind is very mean, it cannot feel gratitude or rejoicing. Rejoicing is a very wholesome virtue because it overcomes jealousy, it overcomes self-loathing, self-doubt, low self-esteem, competitiveness, and are unable to accept other people's happiness and rejoice in them. Is because we can't feel happy for the other. But some people's goodness we are happy, we rejoice them because we're biased to them. But we can really practice gratitude and rejoicing. It can prevent sadness and depression. Rejoicing, by the way, in Samanthabhada's prayer is one of the 7 limbs, 7 limbs. It's a limb. It's one of the 7 limbs without which we couldn't travel on the path to enlightenment. When people have no rejoicing, they have a lot of sadness and grief. And they're usually angry about themselves or about someone, let alone rejoicing their life and their mother or their kindness and the other good things in their life. So gratitude in Buddhism is one of the high on the list of virtue. When Buddhism talks about 6 recollection, one of the recollection is parents. They say recollection of the parents makes you to remember how old they are, how many years they spent doing amazing heavy lifting for our well-being, and they got old. And it completely empowers us to be able to feel gratitude to our parents. When we feel gratitude to our parents, even those few grievances we have are completely forgivable. We have the moral and intellectual authority to forgive them. Some people want to forgive somebody, but they don't have the power to forgive. If they have the gratitude, on the other hand, if the gratitude outweighs the opposite, then it completely can remedy the imbalance. And then one feels so powerful to be able to get rid of this resentment, get rid of this selfishness that didn't allow us to recover our memory of gratitude. So when you regain, you can reconnect love. You have power to love your mother again because you can remember her kindness, which you have instead forgotten for whatever. So the recollection of the parent is one of the amazing virtuous things, because then it empowers us to offset all the grievances we have about them. And not only that, our own physical body is a gift to our parents. People don't even recollect. They are gift of their parents' body. Your nose, your head, everything looks like your parents, And they are all gift of them. Their sweat and tear and hardships, many years of hard saving, they're all bestowed upon us. But many people don't remember all the hardships our parents went through. That's why Buddha from early days said one of the things you could recollect is parent. And of course he knows, once people remember the parent, then they remember what they did that are good, what they gave me as life and education and so on and so forth. Everything. Once you recollect the good things, when you recollect good things, you rejoice. And why people have lots of resentment and anger? They only try to recollect the bad episodes, which are often their own mind. A lot of them are actually misinformation. They are not correct. When they correctly remembers everything, then they become kind to themselves. Then they develop the empathy and then they will develop kindness, and they change their behaviors, and then they're happy that they're able to do that. Then compassion blossoms between oneself and other. So rejoicing is amazing practice. It's a gratitude. It's practice of gratitude. When we say grace, actually, the word grace is a very nice word. So just before eating food, what it really means is, people may say thank the Buddha or Lord or something like that, but that's religious. But that's the least of it. The main thing is that we are fortunate to have such abundance of food in this country, and such clean, good food. We rejoice that, but we have to eat them with moderately. We will eat with good purpose. When you have that, then it's grace. And we don't overeat. We don't feed the wrong things for our body that we don't need. And we become much more mindful when we say the grace, when we rejoice. We also remember millions of people, 55 million refugee people every day running for life, have no place they go home, no place to go, cook a kitchen for go and help themselves. Think of them. And feel grateful that we have such a good fortune to live in peace and abundance. So when we do that, we have no food-related, upset and unhappy feelings. So gratitude is, and the result of this first bhumi is usually joyful, joy. The spiritual practitioners have more joy from their having love and kindness and refuge and bodhicitta and good people in their life. If they rejoice these few things, that's already abundance meditation. As some people are so starving, but yet they don't know how to think good thoughts. They're starving for knowledge. They don't know how to meditate on gratitude. Simplicity, gratitude. Even the simplicity in Buddhism we don't call poverty. Like the monastics lead a life of simplicity, but they're more delighted by Dharma than having to need to battle to get so much material things for themselves. If they do anything, that's for the benefit of the sentient beings, for the benefit of the greater good of many. When you have that, you have more joy, more rejoiceable joy later in the years. Because the pleasure that we find from things are so short-lived. But the rejoicing and joy are everlasting. You can never feel running out of things to rejoice when you have the skill to practice joyfulness. Joyfulness is in Buddhism one of the four immeasurables. Rejoicing. People who have joy, they don't contract many illnesses. Even if they have, they don't impinge you. They just make you grow. They become more, Even in illness, they're still joyful. Yeah. Even in the illness, they know that their body that has gone through some reconstitution makes them to realize how fleeting this life is. But yet, it is still holding together, and it is not quite bursting yet. You can hear the cracks and cracking sounds here and there, but it's not quite bursting yet, and you're still smiling. Yes, amazing. We have very many Dharma brothers here and there. They always talk about, oh, Rinpoche, I have this thing diagnosed, but I'm really happy. Really mean it, because they no longer attach the body as me. which is joy. They still know that they have the Dharma to think of that, and life as just an illusion. And you've seen so many; it's not just yours one. And because of that, they no longer have the same fear and attachment to the body that they previously may have had. Why? They have joy of wisdom that props them up, and not make them feel frightened by sign of whatever the case might be, because life is fleeting. It's constantly shifting and changing, and it's not just to us. This happened so many times before, so it's old story. And a practitioner is delighted by how many years we have basically managed to not escape but still stay alive. So one can die consciously and delightful and dignified way when you have joy of Dharma, when you have rejoice of meeting the Dharma, your life you can never blame life being too short. The shortness of life itself is a teaching, remember? So why not celebrate the teaching? Before it was a theory, here you're seeing it. So that's why many practitioners die in a very amazing way. Why they're able to die in grace, with such peace and tranquility and maybe spectacular blessings. Why? Because they're not frightened. They're not clinging to the aggregate as me and mine. And for them, the body is just a emptiness of a form. And you have seen your body changing many times. It definitely have no trace of the past body that it was. The fact that what it is now looks like a even more an authenticator of what you're not. Because of that, person who passed away has no sadness, has just joy of not attached, and have no anguish to think the body is me, because it is not. It is composite. It is now decomposing. In a composite, decomposing is pretty obvious, And now you don't put things in the compost that are not composite. You put in the compost, that was something. Organic, everything's constantly changing. Thank you for that question.
We have another question here, Rinpoche.
Okay, that will be the last one.
Last one? Okay. This is from someone in the room here in Canberra. So to develop our compassion and our loving kindness, do we have to practice empathy with others who are lost in greed and ignorance? If empathy means to experience another's suffering and their ignorance, does this mean we also suffer with them to develop our compassion? Do we have to empathize and suffer to develop compassion and loving kindness? Is this the means to enter the path?
Yes, because if we do not feel suffering of others, we usually are scared of their suffering as being truly existing. When you know the suffering is a feeling, when your feeling is one of the 5 composite and aggregates, their feelings are also transient. Their feelings are also impermanent. So unless we have the daring ability to know that, unless we can really feel the sufferings of others, we could not empathize. If we do not feel the sufferings of others, we could not transform our own fear of suffering or true existence of suffering as as otherwise. So we do not remove their sufferings 100% by feeling their sufferings. It's not something that we can take their sufferings and they will go without suffering. But our suffering our empathy will change our aversion to suffering as truly existing or sentient beings as truly existing. Sufferings of others, you can see, becoming not only a cause of your growth and compassion, but also makes yourself to see that without relying on the sentient being suffering, we can not grow ourselves compassionately. So you cannot develop compassion by looking at a rock or feeling, or even with the statue of Buddha. We can only develop compassion. They say compassion to direct it to sentient beings. We have to first direct it means we have to hone into the sufferings of others. And the reason is that when you feel the sufferings of others, they say, then you are in the shoes of others. That's why the teaching requires us to meditate on sufferings of animal realm until you experience like an animal in the cold winter night, chased by their predators, running hither and thither, just almost like role play in your mind, until you really know what's like to be only a one night over wildlife. You have no way to actually empathize the sufferings of animal, such situation. When you have the experience, first-hand experience, we can call it, first experience of suffering of being an animal or being a person, and whatever the case might be, the more we are able to do that, then we actually have the first-hand experience of being with them, like them, in order to inform us to feel in this very body what is like. It will transform us. If you go to a third world country, it definitely transforms your perception. If you haven't seen any people living like that, we just have only heard stories. But when you have actually seen how they live and how that's their day-to-day experience, then you have a completely different way of assessing and of other people's, and also how selfish we usually are. We don't even know till then. We don't even know how unnecessary most of our sufferings even are. Whereas other people's suffering is just you can't deny it. It's just right before you. So the feeling and knowing other people's suffering is first-hand experience. They say the direct experience is true experience. And if we have direct experience of someone who is suffering and have been in their situation, looked from their point of view, what they have to go through, your world of the suffering of others will be completely different picture than those you've heard of their suffering or than they're written about their suffering. So the meditative experience of Nyongwa Tsema they call valid experience. You have to validate your experience of being in the shoes of others. That gives rise to certain emotive responses in you that previously you would not even want to go there. You don't want to feel like that at all. You don't even want to feel that in yourself for a little while. let alone go in other people's suffering and feel that at all. We usually are very resistant even to talk about such things. You know, they say if your flesh trembles and you get frightened by tales of the hells, he says, what would be like to be actually feel them? So that's why we have to actually experience some of the sufferings as best as we can. Then, like mothers and parents could never be taught to feel the suffering of the children than being one, Being one, a parent who have done that heavy lifting task for the well-being of any child, for that matter, even in comfort. A lot of the mothers never knew they will have to feel that much until they have their children on their own child. Motherhood actually teaches amazing degree of compassion. They say motherhood teaches selflessness. Person naturally becomes selfless. The child becomes first, almost more important than themselves. And this is not just humans, even animals do that. You can see that mother risk their own danger and go and help young from dangers. So it's almost like, just unintentionally they do it. It's just naturally they do it. Not because they don't mind suffering, but they seem to have a capacity not to mind when it comes to, for the sake of the loved one. So being able to feel and know the sufferings of others firsthand experience completely transforms us. The depth and breadth of suffering that other beings have that we haven't even heard about, let alone experience. This then not only help us to be compassionate to them, but become more patient with ourselves, with our share of sufferings. It completely transforms us in not being so impatient with our sufferings, and we become a little bit more, I would say, tenacious in dealing with our own sufferings, a bit more patient with our sufferings, because thinking of others' suffering, this is nothing, and then you make this positive comparison and find a kind of a new sort of adrenaline that you will discover because of your ability to experience and empathize sufferings of others. So with this we will conclude. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll do the dedication of merits.